My name is Rob, and I have lived most of my adult life with the woman I call not only my wife, but my best friend. Hallie and I have been married for a short time, but we have known each other for almost 8 years. She has been by my side at every step of our journey together, supporting me in all my endeavors, not only as my wife, but also as a true friend. Our relationship has always been stable and full of mutual support. My business, which I started a few years ago, was our shared dream. Hallie has always believed in me, even when I doubted my abilities. But lately, things have not gone as I had hoped. My financial problems began to pile up, and the business that once seemed promising began to fall apart at the seams. Despite all the difficulties, I knew I could rely on Hallie. She always had the right words for me when I was down. We would sit in the kitchen in the evenings, drink tea, and discuss how to change the situation. Hallie always listened to me with attention, offering her ideas or just supporting me morally. These moments were important to me because I felt that I was not alone in my problems. Hallie always seemed to know how to make me look at things from a different perspective. She reminded me of all the times we overcame difficulties together, of the times when I thought all was lost. But in the end, I came out on top. Her faith in me was always unbreakable, and it gave me strength. My relationship with Hallie was my only refuge during these difficult times. I often thought about how lucky I was to find someone who understands me like no one else. Even when I was on the verge of despair, she stayed by my side, supporting me with her presence, her warmth and love. Recently, I have had many sleepless nights thinking about the future. Will I be able to save my business? Will Hallie and I be able to maintain our lifestyle? These questions have been on my mind. But every time I started to doubt, I remembered her words. We will get through this together. And these words became an anchor for me, which did not allow me to plunge into the gloom of despair. With her, I could be myself without fear of appearing weak or helpless. She saw me at my worst and still stayed by my side. It was the greatest blessing in my life. It didn't matter how events would develop further. I knew one thing. As long as Hallie was with me, I would be able to overcome any difficulties. Her love and support were the light that helped me find my way even in the darkest times. As my business demands grew, I became more and more absorbed in work, often losing track of time. Days turned into nights as I buried myself in projects, meetings, and the constant pressure to keep everything afloat. I didn't notice it at first, but the hours I spent away from home started to add up. The once precious moments with Hallie became fleeting, mere whispers in the wind of my chaotic schedule. I told myself it was just temporary, that once the business was back on track, everything would return to normal. But deep down, I knew something was changing. Hallie, who had always been my anchor, seemed to drift further from me. At first, I was relieved when she wasn't around much. It meant fewer chances for her to feel neglected or lonely, fewer opportunities for us to argue about my constant absence. I convinced myself that it was better this way, that she was finding her own activities, her own friends, to keep herself busy while I was caught up in the whirlwind of work. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't help but notice that she was gone more often than not. The house felt emptier, quieter. I'd come home late at night to find her side of the bed cold, her presence missing from the spaces we used to share. At first I dismissed it, thinking she was simply out with friends or visiting her family. She was always a social person after all. But the pattern continued, and what once brought me relief now began to gnaw at me with a sense of unease. I found myself questioning where she was going, who she was spending her time with. The silence of the house, once a welcome respite, started to feel suffocating. I'd sit at the kitchen table, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that I was imagining things because of the stress. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling wouldn't go away. Hallie and I had always been close, sharing everything. But now, it seemed like there was a growing distance between us, one that I couldn't quite understand or bridge. I realized that I had been so consumed by my work that I had let something important slip through my fingers. And now, I was left with a lingering doubt that something was amiss, something I had been too blind to see. The weight of the business was crushing me, and I could feel it in every part of my life. The sleepless nights, the constant stress, it all bore down on me like a heavy cloak. All I wanted was a few moments of peace, a chance to unload my worries onto someone who cared. I needed Helly's support more than ever, but when I finally turned to her, hoping for comfort, I was met with something else entirely. It had been another rough day at work. I came home, exhausted and on edge, hoping that talking to Helly would help me find some relief. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil I was going through. "Helly," I began, my voice heavy with fatigue, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The business is it's falling apart." She barely looked up from her phone. "You've been saying that for weeks, Rob. Maybe it's time you just let it go." I blinked, taken aback by the coldness in her voice. "Let it go? This is our livelihood, Helly. I can't just walk away." She sighed, a long, exasperated sound that grated against my already frayed nerves. "I know, Rob, but all you do is complain about it. Every single day it's the same thing. I'm tired of hearing it." The sting of her words hit me harder than I expected. "I thought you understood how much this means to me. I thought you'd want to help me get through this." "Help you?" She finally set her phone down and looked at me, her eyes flashing with irritation. "How exactly am I supposed to help you? All you do is whine and mope around the house. It's depressing, Rob. I'm sick of it." Her words felt like a slap to the face. I stood there trying to process the sudden turn in our conversation. "I'm not trying to bring you down, Helly. I just need someone to talk to, someone to lean on." She rolled her eyes, a gesture that sent a wave of anger through me. "Lean on someone else, Rob. I'm done being your emotional punching bag. You're always so wrapped up in your own problems, you never even notice that I'm dealing with my own stuff too." I felt a flare of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the frustration building inside me. "What stuff, Helly? You never talk to me about anything anymore. I come home, and it's like you're not even here half the time." "Maybe because I don't want to be here," she snapped, standing up to face me. "You're so absorbed in your own misery that you don't see what's happening right in front of you." "I'm tired, Rob. I'm tired of you, of this whole situation. You're always talking about how hard things are for you, but what about me? What about how I feel?" Her words cut deep, and for a moment I was at a loss for how to respond. I had been so focused on my own struggles that I hadn't realized just how distant she had become, how much resentment had built up between us. "I didn't know you felt this way," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I thought we were in this together, that you were still on my side." Helly shook her head, her expression hardening. "You've been too wrapped up in your business to notice anything else, and now I'm done with all of it. I can't keep doing this, Rob. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." "Helly, please," I pleaded, feeling the panic rising in my chest. "I know I've been distant, but I need you. I can't get through this without you." She looked at me with something close to pity, and that was perhaps the most painful thing of all. "Rob, I don't think I can be what you need anymore. I've tried, but I don't have anything left to give." The finality in her voice left me speechless. I had come home hoping for comfort, for reassurance, but instead, I felt more alone than ever. The woman who had once been my rock, my closest confidant, was now pushing me away. The rest of the night passed in a blur of silence. Helly retreated to the bedroom, leaving me standing in the living room, reeling from the harsh reality of our situation. I wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch, that we could somehow find our way back to each other. But the emptiness in her eyes, the coldness in her words, it all pointed to something much deeper, something broken that I wasn't sure we could fix. As I sat alone on the couch, the weight of the argument settled over me like a heavy blanket. The house, once a place of solace, now felt like a prison, trapping me in a cycle of doubt and regret. I had always thought that as long as we had each other, we could face anything, but now I wasn't so sure. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something important, something I couldn't afford to lose. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if it was already too late to get it back. After that argument, things between Helly and me changed in ways I couldn't quite understand. It was as if a wall had sprung up between us, invisible but unmistakable. She moved through our home like a ghost, her presence barely there, her thoughts always seeming elsewhere. Every time I tried to talk to her, to bridge the gap that had suddenly opened, she would find a way to avoid it, saying she was tired or that she had something else to do. It was like she had withdrawn into herself, leaving me alone with my growing anxiety. I missed the connection we used to have, the easy way we could talk about anything. Now, even the smallest conversation felt strained, as if we were speaking different languages. I told myself it was just a phase, that we would get through it. But the distance between us was gnawing at me. Our wedding anniversary was approaching, and I clung to the hope that maybe, if I did something special, it would bring us back together. Helly had shown me a picture of a necklace not too long ago. She had been scrolling through her phone, and when she found the image, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "Isn't it beautiful?" she'd asked, her eyes gleaming as she turned the screen towards me. I remembered how much she loved it, and I decided that it would be the perfect anniversary gift. Maybe if I surprised her with something she really wanted, it would remind her of how much I cared, how much I was still here, even if things had been rocky lately. But there was a problem. I couldn't remember the name of the store or even the exact design of the necklace. I just knew it was saved somewhere in her phone. The plan was simple. I'd find the photo, track down the necklace, and give it to her on our anniversary. It would be a gesture that could, I hoped, start to mend the rift between us. One evening when Helly was in the shower, I saw her phone lying on the coffee table. My heart raced as I reached for it, thinking of the surprise I was planning. But when I pressed the home button, my stomach dropped. There was a password, a 6-digit code I had never seen before. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of shock wash over me. We had always shared everything. Our phones had been open books to each other, no secrets, no locked doors, or at least that's what I thought. Now this password felt like a barrier, a sign that something was seriously wrong. Why would she need to lock her phone? What was she hiding? My mind spiraled with possibilities, none of them good. I put the phone back down, trying to shake off the unease. I couldn't just ask her for the password. It would ruin the surprise. But the more I thought about it, the more the idea of a surprise seemed like a flimsy excuse to avoid the real issue. What was I doing sneaking around like this? And what did it say about our relationship that I felt the need to? That night I lay in bed, my thoughts racing. Helly was beside me, but it felt like she was miles away. The soft glow of her phone screen lit up the room occasionally as she checked messages or scrolled through whatever it was that kept her attention these days. I wanted to ask her about the password, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to accuse her of anything. I didn't even know what I would be accusing her of, but the silence was unbearable. The next few days were torture. Every time I saw her phone, the thought of that password gnawed at me. What was she hiding? Why now, of all times? I tried to focus on the anniversary, on the idea that this gift could be the thing to bring us back together, but it was hard to push those doubts aside. They crept into my mind when I least expected it, turning something that should have been simple and joyful into a source of constant anxiety. I found myself watching her more closely, noticing things I hadn't before. The way she would quickly put her phone away when I walked into the room. The hushed tone she used when taking certain calls. The brief, almost guilty look she'd throw my way afterward. Each small detail added to the weight in my chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to think clearly. I started imagining all kinds of scenarios, each worse than the last. Was she talking to someone else, planning something behind my back? The thought of Helly being unfaithful was like a knife to the heart, but I couldn't stop myself from going there. It seemed like the only explanation that fit the way she had been acting, the way she had pulled away from me. But then, another part of me rebelled against the idea. This was Helly, my wife, my partner for the past 8 years. We had been through so much together, faced so many challenges. I couldn't believe she would betray me like that. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for the password, something I hadn't thought of. But the doubts lingered, festering in the back of my mind, poisoning everything. As our anniversary approached, I became more desperate to find a way to bridge the gap between us. I still didn't have the necklace, and without access to her phone, I was stuck. The thought of asking her directly still felt wrong. What if she didn't react the way I hoped? What if my asking for the password confirmed her worst suspicions about me? In the end, I decided to hold off, to wait and see if she would bring it up herself. Maybe, I reasoned, if I gave her the space she seemed to need, she would come back to me on her own. But the uncertainty was driving me crazy, making every interaction with her feel like a test, a game where I didn't know the rules. Finally, the night before our anniversary, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in my hand. I knew I shouldn't, but the urge to figure out what was going on was too strong to resist. I tried a few possible combinations, birthdays, anniversaries, even old addresses, but nothing worked. The phone remained locked, the screen taunting me with its refusal to give up its secrets. Defeated, I put the phone back down and ran a hand through my hair. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to fix this. The gift, the anniversary. It all seemed so trivial now, just a band-aid over a much deeper wound. I wanted to believe that things would get better, that we would find our way back to each other. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if that was possible. When Helly came home later that night, I tried to act normal, tried to push down the doubts that had been eating away at me. But I knew she could sense that something was off. She gave me a curious look as she walked past, her eyes flicking to the phone on the table. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she just smiled faintly and headed to the bedroom. I was left standing there, feeling more alone than ever. The password on her phone was just a small thing, but it symbolized so much more. Everything that had changed between us, everything that was now uncertain. And as I stood there in the quiet of our home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, something I might never be able to get back. Determined to make our upcoming anniversary special, I spent days scouring every jewelry store I could find, hoping to locate a necklace similar to the one Helly had shown me. It was exhausting, but after what felt like endless searching, I finally found something that I thought matched the design she had loved. Holding it in my hands, I felt a small surge of satisfaction. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw it, just like when she had shown me the picture. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that this gift might help bridge the growing distance between us. But deep down, I knew that a piece of jewelry couldn't fix what was broken. The cracks in our relationship were too deep, too complicated to be mended by a mere necklace. We had been barely talking, and I couldn't pretend that it was just because we were busy with work. That excuse didn't hold up anymore, not with the tension that had been building between us. One evening, after another long day at the office, I returned home expecting to find Helly there, as she usually was. But the house was empty. It was strange. Helly was always home by this time. I checked the clock. It was already 10:15. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but a gnawing worry started to take root in my mind. I called her, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her phone was off, and that was even stranger. Helly never turned off her phone, especially not this late. I sat down in the darkened living room, trying to keep my thoughts in check. But as the minutes ticked by, unease turned into outright anxiety. Where was she? What could possibly be keeping her out this late? The quiet of the house only amplified my fears. I sat there for hours, staring at the door, willing it to open, praying that she would walk in with some simple explanation that would put my mind at ease. It was well past midnight when I finally heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. My heart raced as I hurried to the window, peering out through the curtains. I saw a taxi idling at the curb, and then, to my shock, I watched as Helly stumbled out of the back seat. She was clearly drunk, barely able to keep her balance as she fumbled with her purse. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We had been trying to conceive for years, adopting a strict, healthy lifestyle with no alcohol, no cigarettes, and a focus on clean living. Seeing her like this, all our efforts and plans seemed to dissolve in an instant. I felt a hot wave of anger rise within me, fueled by a mix of disbelief and betrayal. Without thinking, I stormed outside, slamming the front door behind me. The cold night air hit me as I marched across the driveway, my anger building with every step. "Helly!" I shouted as I approached her, my voice trembling with rage. "What the hell is going on? Where have you been?" She looked up at me, her eyes glazed and unfocused. "Oh, it's you," she slurred, barely able to stand straight. "Why are you yelling?" "Why am I yelling?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're drunk, Helly. We've been working so hard to stay healthy, to have a baby, and now you show up like this? Do you even care anymore?" She waved me off, stumbling towards the house. "Don't be so dramatic, Rob. It was just a few drinks. No big deal." "No big deal?" I was almost shouting now, the frustration I'd been holding back for weeks spilling over. "We've spent years trying to conceive, years. And now you're out getting drunk? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Helly stopped and turned to face me, her expression shifting from indifferent to defiant. "Maybe I'm just tired, Rob. Tired of trying, tired of everything. You ever think about that?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Tired of everything?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Tired of us? Is that what you're saying?" She didn't answer, just brushed past me and headed towards the front door. I stood there watching her go, feeling completely helpless. The woman I had known, the woman I had loved and built a life with, seemed like a stranger to me now. I followed her inside, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Helly, we need to talk about this," I said, my voice calmer now, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. "Not now, Rob," she mumbled, dropping her purse on the floor and collapsing onto the couch. "I'm tired. I just want to sleep." Sleep. That's all she wanted to do, as if nothing was wrong, as if this wasn't the most important conversation we'd ever needed to have. I stood there, staring at her as she curled up on the couch, her back turned to me, shutting me out completely. The anger inside me turned cold, replaced by a deep, hollow feeling of despair. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to make her understand what she was doing to us. But I knew it would be useless. She was too far gone, too wrapped up in whatever she was feeling to hear me. I walked back to the living room, feeling numb, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. I sat down on the armchair opposite the couch, watching her as she drifted off to sleep. I didn't want to be near her, didn't want to look at her. But at the same time, I couldn't tear my eyes away. This was the woman I had promised to spend the rest of my life with, the woman I had fought so hard to build a future with. And now she was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The hours dragged on, the silence in the house almost deafening. I sat there, unable to move, unable to think of anything but the mess we were in. The necklace I had bought for her sat in its box in the bedroom, forgotten. It seemed so pointless now, a trinket that couldn't possibly fix the damage that had been done. I thought about the life we had planned, the dreams we had shared, and how quickly it had all unraveled. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I finally got up and went to the bedroom, leaving Helly to sleep on the couch. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to be reminded of the woman she had become. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head, trying to shut out the world, but the thoughts kept coming, relentless and unyielding. How had we gotten to this point? How had we gone from being so close, so in love, to this? I replayed the night's events over and over in my head, trying to pinpoint where it had all gone wrong, but there was no single moment, no clear answer. It was a slow decay, a gradual erosion of everything we had once held dear. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me, the indifference in her eyes, the way she had shrugged off everything we had worked for. It was like she didn't care anymore, like I didn't matter to her at all. And that, more than anything, broke my heart. I had always thought that as long as we had each other, we could get through anything, but now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, Helly was gone before I woke up. The couch was empty, the blanket she had used folded neatly on the armrest. I didn't know where she had gone, and for the first time I didn't care. I was too tired, too worn down to chase after her, to try to fix something that felt beyond repair. I stayed in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. The house was quiet, the emptiness pressing in on me from all sides. I knew I had to confront her, to make her see what she was doing to us, but I didn't know if I had the strength anymore. The anger I had felt the night before had burned itself out, leaving behind only a deep, aching sadness. By the time I finally got up, it was afternoon. I wandered through the house, feeling lost, unsure of where to go or what to do. The necklace was still in its box on the dresser, a cruel reminder of how far we had drifted apart. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. It was beautiful, just like the one Helly had shown me. But now it felt like a hollow gesture, something that couldn't possibly bridge the chasm between us. I put the necklace back in the box and set it aside. I didn't know what our anniversary would bring, but I knew that it wouldn't be the celebration I had hoped for. The future that had once seemed so bright and full of promise now felt uncertain, fragile, like it could crumble at any moment. And as I stood there, alone in our empty house, I realized that the necklace was just a symbol of something much bigger, something that had been lost along the way. And I didn't know if we could ever get it back. The phone rang late in the afternoon, and when I saw Melissa's name on the screen, I hesitated for a moment before answering. Helly's sister and I had always gotten along well, but with everything that had been going on, I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever conversation might follow. Still, I couldn't avoid it forever, so I took a deep breath and picked up. "Hey, Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Rob, how are you?" Her tone was warm, but there was an edge to it, like she could sense something wasn't right. "I'm hanging in there," I replied, not wanting to dive into the mess that my life had become just yet. "Listen, I was calling to see if you guys needed any help with the anniversary preparations for this Saturday. I know you usually have everyone over for dinner, and I thought I could lend a hand." I felt a pang of guilt hearing her say that. Our anniversary dinners had always been something special, a time when we gathered our closest friends and family around the table, celebrating the love that Helly and I shared. But this year, things were different. Everything was different. "Melissa," I started, struggling to find the right words, "I don't think there's going to be any celebration this year." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Melissa's voice came through, softer now. "Rob, what's going on? You don't sound like yourself." I sighed, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. Things between Helly and me, they haven't been good. We're barely talking, and when we do, it's just arguments. She's been distant, and I don't even know how to reach her anymore. Melissa didn't say anything for a moment, and when she finally spoke, there was a heaviness in her voice. "Rob, I had a feeling something was off. Helly's been acting strange lately, and I've been worried about her, but I didn't want to overstep." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's been going on?" "Well," Melissa hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully, "I've noticed some things. Helly's been secretive, evasive even. She used to tell me everything, but lately, she's been shutting me out. And I don't know how to say this, but I've wondered if she's seeing someone else." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, but at the same time, part of me wasn't surprised. The late nights, the locked phone, the way she had pulled away from me, it all pointed to something I had been too afraid to fully acknowledge. "Melissa, do you really think that's possible?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know for sure, Rob," she admitted, "but I've seen the signs before. It's the way she's acting, like she's carrying a secret. I didn't want to believe it, but with everything you've told me, I think it's something we need to consider." I felt sick to my stomach, the reality of her words sinking in. I've been trying so hard to make things work, to fix whatever's broken between us, but if she's... If she's cheating, I don't know how to deal with that. I'm so sorry, Rob, Melissa said softly. I wish I could tell you it's not true, but I think you need to be prepared for the worst. I wanted to talk to you in person, maybe help you figure out what's really going on. Can we meet? Yeah, I agreed, feeling a mixture of dread and relief. Yeah, we should talk. Okay, let's meet tomorrow, she suggested. We'll figure this out together, Rob. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. As I hung up the phone, I felt a cold emptiness settle in my chest. Melissa's suspicions had confirmed the fears that had been gnawing at me for weeks, and now there was no turning back. I didn't know what I was going to do, how I was going to confront Helly. But one thing was clear. Our anniversary wasn't going to be the celebration it was meant to be. Instead, it might be the beginning of the end. Meeting Melissa in the park felt like stepping into a different world. The air was crisp, the sun filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. People were walking their dogs, children were playing, and couples strolled hand in hand. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil I was feeling inside. As I approached the bench where Melissa was sitting, I could see the concern etched on her face. She didn't waste any time with pleasantries. She knew why we were here. Rob, she began as soon as I sat down beside her, I've been thinking about everything you told me, and I'm worried. I think Helly might be making the same mistakes she made before. I frowned, not understanding what she meant. What do you mean, Melissa? What mistakes? She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right way to say what she needed to. Rob, there's something you need to know about Helly's first marriage. I know she told you it was a mistake of her youth, but that's not the whole story. A knot formed in my stomach. I had known Helly was married before, but she had always been vague about the details, dismissing it as a brief and regrettable chapter in her life. I had never pressed her for more information, trusting her to tell me what she wanted to share. Now I was starting to wonder what else I didn't know. What do you mean? I asked, my voice tinged with apprehension. Melissa took a deep breath before continuing. Helly's first marriage ended because she cheated on her husband. She was young, yes, but it wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior. She became distant, secretive, just like she is now. I'm scared she's repeating those same patterns, Rob. I stared at her, stunned. The words didn't seem real. Helly had never hinted at anything like this, never given me any reason to doubt her. But as Melissa's words sank in, I realized that the signs had been there all along. The distance, the secrecy, the locked phone. I had just been too blind, or maybe too trusting to see them for what they were. I can't believe this, I said, shaking my head. She never told me any of this. She made it sound like her first marriage was just a bad decision, something that didn't work out. I know, Melissa said softly. She probably didn't want you to think less of her. But Rob, I'm telling you this because I don't want to see her hurt you the way she hurt her first husband. I've been seeing the same changes in her that I saw back then. She's pulling away, acting like she's got something to hide. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm worried. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, like everything I thought I knew was suddenly up for questioning. So, what do we do? I asked, feeling helpless. If she's cheating, how do we find out? How do we stop it? Melissa looked at me, her expression serious. I don't know if we can stop it, Rob, but we can try to find out the truth. I'm going to talk to her, see if I can get her to open up, but I doubt she'll admit to anything even if it's true. She's stubborn, and if she feels cornered, she'll just shut down. I nodded, knowing she was right. Helly was strong-willed, and once she made up her mind about something, it was hard to get her to change course. So what's the plan? I asked, wanting to do something, anything to take back some control over the situation. I'll come over on Thursday, Melissa said. I'll tell her I'm there to help with the preparations for the anniversary dinner. I'll stay with you guys, spend as much time with her as I can. Maybe if I'm around her more, I'll be able to figure out what's going on, or at least get a better sense of what she's hiding. I nodded again, though my mind was spinning. The idea of Melissa staying with us, watching Helly, trying to uncover her secrets, felt both necessary and invasive. But what choice did we have? I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Do you really think this will work?" I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. "It's worth a shot," Melissa replied. "I know it's not a perfect plan, but I'm hoping that if I can spend some time with her, I'll be able to see through whatever she's trying to hide. And if she is cheating, maybe I can get her to admit it, or at least slip up in some way." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Okay, let's do it. Come over on Thursday. Maybe this will give us some answers." Melissa reached out and squeezed my hand. "Rob, I'm really sorry you're going through this. I wish I could tell you that everything's going to be fine, but I don't know what's going to happen. Just know that I'm here for you no matter what." "Thanks, Melissa," I said, grateful for her support, even as my heart ached with uncertainty. "I appreciate it." We sat there for a few more minutes, neither of us saying much. The park around us was so peaceful, a sharp contrast to the storm that was brewing in my life. I couldn't help but wonder how things had gotten to this point. Had I missed the warning signs? Had I been too caught up in my own world to notice what was happening to my marriage? As we stood up to leave, Melissa looked at me with a mix of concern and determination. "We'll figure this out, Rob. One way or another, we'll get to the bottom of it." I nodded, trying to muster up some confidence, but the truth was, I didn't know what to expect. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring down into the unknown, and the only thing I could do was hold on and hope that somehow we would find a way through this. The days leading up to Thursday felt like an eternity. I went through the motions of work and life, but my mind was always on Helly, on the conversation I had with Melissa, and the plan we had set in motion. Every time Helly looked at me, I couldn't help but wonder if she knew something was up, if she could sense the doubts swirling in my mind. I tried to act normal, to keep up the facade that everything was okay, but it was exhausting. Thursday finally arrived, and I found myself feeling a mix of anxiety and dread. Melissa arrived in the early afternoon, greeting me with a tense smile as she carried her bags into the house. Helly was out at the time, so we had a few moments to discuss the plan before she returned. "Remember," Melissa said as she set her bags down in the guest room, "we're going to play it cool. I'm just here to help with the dinner preparations, nothing more. We don't want to raise any suspicions." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all going to blow up in our faces. "Got it. I'll do my best to keep things normal." Melissa gave me a reassuring pat on the back. "It'll be okay, Rob. We're just trying to figure out what's really going on. And if we're wrong, then no harm done." I wanted to believe that, but the weight of what we were doing hung heavy over me. What if we weren't wrong? What if Helly really was cheating? The thought of it made me feel sick, but I pushed it down, knowing that I needed to keep it together for this to work. Helly arrived home a short while later, looking surprised, but pleased to see Melissa. "Hey, what are you doing here?" she asked, giving her sister a hug. "I thought I'd come help you guys get ready for the anniversary dinner," Melissa replied with a smile. "Figured you could use an extra pair of hands." Helly laughed, though I noticed a flicker of something in her eyes. Unease, maybe? "That's sweet of you. I could use the help, actually. There's a lot to do." I watched the interaction closely, trying to read Helly's body language, but she seemed genuinely pleased to have her sister around. If she was hiding something, she was doing a good job of covering it up. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity as we all worked together, preparing food, setting the table, and making sure everything was perfect for the dinner. As the hours went by, I kept waiting for something to happen, for Helly to slip up, for Melissa to find some clue that would confirm our suspicions. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Helly was her usual self, laughing and joking with Melissa, chatting with me as if nothing was wrong. If she was hiding something, she wasn't giving it away. But as the evening wore on, I noticed Melissa growing quieter, her eyes following Helly with a mix of concern and suspicion. I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. Was this all just a facade? Was Helly playing a role, hiding her true feelings behind a mask of normalcy? Finally, after dinner, when Helly had gone upstairs to take a shower, Melissa pulled me aside. "I don't know, Rob," she said quietly. "She's good at keeping things hidden. But I still think there's something off/Saturday arrived, and with it the heavy anticipation of what the day might bring." The house was a flurry of activity as Helly and Melissa prepared for the evening. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand, helping where I could, but my mind was elsewhere, churning over everything that had happened in the past week. Melissa and Helly seemed to be getting along well, chatting as they moved around the kitchen, organizing dishes and making final adjustments to the menu. I watched them closely, searching for any sign, any small clue that would indicate something was amiss. But Helly appeared relaxed, at ease, almost as if the tension of the past few weeks had melted away. It should have reassured me, but instead, it left me feeling more. As we began setting the table, I saw my opportunity to talk to Melissa. Helly was busy in the kitchen, her back turned to us as she focused on a sauce that needed just the right amount of seasoning. I leaned in closer to Melissa, keeping my voice low. "So, what do you think?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Melissa glanced towards the kitchen, making sure Helly wasn't listening, then turned back to me with a small shake of her head. "Rob, I haven't seen anything. No clues, no hints. Helly hasn't given any indication that she's involved with someone else." Her words hung in the air between us, and I struggled to process them. On one hand, I should have felt relieved, grateful even, that there were no signs of infidelity. But instead, I found myself grappling with a strange mix of emotions, relief tinged with disappointment, and an unsettling sense of unease. "Are you sure?" I pressed, not entirely satisfied with her answer. "There's nothing at all? No strange behavior, no unexplained absences?" Melissa shook her head again, her expression sympathetic. "I've been watching her closely, Rob, and I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. She's been her usual self, maybe a bit stressed, but that's to be expected with everything going on. If she's hiding something, she's doing a damn good job of it." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb what she was saying. "So, you think I've been overreacting?" "I don't think you're overreacting," Melissa said gently. "I think you've been worried, and rightfully so, with how distant she's been. But from what I've seen, I don't think she's having an affair. At least there's no evidence pointing to that." I didn't know how to feel about that. Shouldn't I be relieved? Shouldn't I be glad that there was no proof? No confirmation of my worst fears? But instead I felt a hollow emptiness settling in my chest. I realized, with a pang of guilt, that a part of me had wanted proof, something tangible to explain the distance between us, something that would justify the growing pit of dread in my stomach. The idea that I might have been wrong, that I might have been letting my insecurities drive a wedge between us, was almost harder to accept than the possibility of her betrayal. "I don't know what to do, Melissa," I admitted quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like everything's falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it." She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of compassion. "Rob, relationships go through rough patches. Maybe this is just one of those times. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you, or that she's unfaithful. It might just mean that you both need to find a way back to each other." I wanted to believe her, but the doubt still gnawed at me. But what if we can't? What if we're too far gone? Melissa squeezed my shoulder, her grip firm but comforting. "You're not too far gone, Rob. You just need to open up to her. Tell her how you're feeling. Maybe she's been struggling too, but doesn't know how to talk to you about it." I sighed, nodding, though the weight in my chest didn't lift. "Yeah, maybe." Helly called out from the kitchen asking for help with something, and Melissa gave me a final encouraging smile before heading off to assist her. I stayed behind for a moment, staring at the neatly set table, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, a time to mark another year of our life together. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. I had always believed that Helly and I could weather any storm, but now I wasn't so sure. The cracks in our relationship, invisible at first, had widened into chasms, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap. Dinner went on as planned, with our friends and family arriving, filling the house with laughter and conversation. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. The food was delicious, the company lively, and Helly seemed to be enjoying herself. But beneath it all, I was still struggling with the turmoil inside me. I caught Melissa's eye a few times throughout the evening, and each time she gave me a reassuring nod, as if to say, "It's going to be okay." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at the remnants of the celebration. Helly was in the kitchen cleaning up with Melissa, and I could hear them chatting softly, their voices a comforting hum in the background. But even in that moment of peace, the doubts lingered. I knew I needed to talk to Helly, to finally lay everything out on the table. But the fear of what might come next, of what she might say, held me back. What if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head? And yet I couldn't help but wonder, what if I was right? As the evening progressed and the house filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, I tried to push aside the lingering doubts and focus on our guests. The dinner was in full swing, with everyone enjoying the food and each other's company. Helly was her usual charming self, playing the perfect hostess, while I did my best to keep up appearances, though my mind was still in turmoil. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone step through the door, someone I hadn't expected to see. My heart skipped a beat, and a cold wave of surprise washed over me. Standing in the entrance, greeting our guests with a warm smile, was Chester. I hadn't seen him in months, not since our paths had diverged in the business world. We had once been close, working side by side, but that was a long time ago. Our ambitions had led us down different roads, and what had started as a friendly rivalry had turned into something much colder. Chester was the last person I expected to see at our family celebration. His presence was a stark reminder of everything I'd been trying to avoid. My business, which had been struggling, and the career I had once been so proud of. The chaos in my personal life had taken its toll on my work, and seeing Chester here, now, brought all of that crashing back to the forefront of my mind. He spotted me across the room and made his way over, a confident grin on his face. "Rob," he said, extending his hand, "it's been a while." I forced a smile and shook his hand, though my mind was racing. "Chester, I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he replied with a chuckle. "But I ran into Helly a few weeks ago and she insisted I stop by. It's a pleasure to see you again, especially on such a special occasion." Helly had invited him? The thought made my stomach churn. I hadn't been aware they were still in contact, let alone that she would invite him to our home. I glanced over at her, but she was busy entertaining other guests, seemingly unaware of the tension that had just walked in the door. "Yeah, well, thanks for coming," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's good to see you too." Chester's smile didn't falter, but there was a glint in his eye that I didn't like. He had always been good at reading people, at finding the cracks in their armor, and right now, I felt like mine was full of them. "How's business?" he asked, his tone casual, but I could sense the underlying curiosity. I hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much. "It's been better," I admitted, knowing there was no point in lying. Chester probably already knew more about my situation than I cared to admit. He nodded, a sympathetic look on his face. "These things happen, Rob, but I'm sure you'll bounce back. You've always been resilient." The words were meant to be encouraging, but they only served to remind me of how far I'd fallen. I had been so focused on the problems at home that I had let my business slip through my fingers. And now here was Chester, my biggest competitor, standing in my home, reminding me of everything I had lost. I felt a surge of frustration, a burning desire to get away from this conversation, from this reminder of my failures. But I couldn't just walk away, not without raising suspicion. So I forced myself to stay, to engage in the small talk. All the while my mind was racing with thoughts of how I had let everything fall apart. As the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Chester's presence was more than just a coincidence. He had always been strategic, always thinking several steps ahead. I wondered if he had come here with an ulterior motive, if he was trying to gauge just how far I had fallen. The thought made me uneasy, and I found myself watching him closely, trying to decipher his intentions. But Chester was a master at keeping his cards close to his chest. He mingled with the guests, charming everyone with his wit and easygoing demeanor. He even spent some time talking to Helly, and though I couldn't hear their conversation, I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, a flash of anger at the thought that she might have confided in him, might have told him things she hadn't told me. By the time the evening wound down and the last of the guests began to leave, I was mentally and emotionally exhausted. Chester was one of the last to go, and as he shook my hand at the door, he gave me a look that I couldn't quite read. "Take care of yourself, Rob," he said, his tone almost sincere. "And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." I nodded, forcing another smile. "Thanks, Chester. I appreciate it." He gave me a final nod and turned to leave, and as I watched him walk away, I couldn't help but wonder what had really brought him here tonight. Was it just a social visit, or was there something more to it? The question lingered in my mind long after he had gone, adding another layer of uncertainty to the already tangled mess of my life. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The house was quiet now, the celebration over, but the unease I had felt all evening still clung to me like a shadow. Helly was upstairs, already getting ready for bed, and I knew I should join her, should try to put the events of the night behind me. But instead, I found myself standing in the entryway, staring at the closed door, feeling like I had just missed something important, something that could change everything. For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of foreboding. The evening had been a stark reminder of how much I had let slip through my fingers, both in my personal life and in my business. And now, with Chester's unexpected appearance, it felt like everything was closing in on me, like I was standing on the edge of a precipice about to fall into the unknown. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep going on like this. Something had to change, and soon. But as I turned off the lights and made my way upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever came next, it wasn't going to be easy. Chester's unexpected appearance at our anniversary dinner gnawed at me the entire evening. It wasn't just that he showed up uninvited, it was the way his presence felt like a looming shadow over everything. I couldn't shake the sense that there was something more to his visit, something that went beyond a casual social call. After he arrived, I pulled Helly aside, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Did you invite Chester?" She looked startled, her eyes widening slightly before she quickly shook her head. "No, of course not. Why would I do that? I thought maybe you invited him." Her response didn't sit well with me. She seemed flustered, almost too quick to deny it. My suspicions, already heightened, only grew stronger. Chester had said he ran into Helly a few weeks ago, but she hadn't mentioned it to me. Why? And if she hadn't invited him, how did he know about the dinner? Throughout the evening, I found it impossible to focus on anything else. I kept my eyes on Chester, watching him as he moved through the room, chatting with our guests. He was as charming as ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was a calculated move. My irritation must have been obvious because I caught a few concerned glances from Melissa and some of the other guests. But I didn't care. Something was off, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. As the night wore on and the guests began to leave, I knew I couldn't let Chester walk out without getting some answers. I waited until the others had said their goodbyes, then approached him as he was putting on his coat. "Chester," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible, "can we talk for a minute?" He turned to me, his expression unreadable, and nodded. "Of course, Rob, what's on your mind?" I led him back into the living room, away from the few remaining guests who were still milling about near the door. Once we were alone, I didn't waste any time. "I'll be honest," I began, crossing my arms as I faced him. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight. In fact, I'm not even sure who invited you." Chester's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Amusement, maybe? "I understand your surprise," he said calmly. "But I didn't come here to crash your party. I came because I needed to talk to you." I frowned, my suspicion deepening. "Talk to me? About what?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, holding it out to me. "This." I stared at the folder, then back at him. "What is this?" "Something you need to see," Chester replied, his tone serious. "I wasn't sure how else to get it to you, so I thought this might be the best way." I hesitated, my mind racing. There was something in his demeanor that unsettled me, something that made me feel like this was more than just a friendly gesture. Slowly, I reached out and took the folder from him, feeling the weight of it in my hands. "What's in here?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Chester didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced around the room, making sure we were still alone. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "It's better if you see for yourself, Rob. But I'll say this. It's about your business, and it's something you need to know." My grip tightened on the folder as a sense of dread settled over me. "Why are you giving this to me? What's your angle?" Chester's gaze was steady, almost disarming. "No angle, Rob. Believe it or not, I'm trying to help you. I know we've had our differences, but this is bigger than that." I searched his face for any sign of deception, but all I saw was a calm seriousness that only made me more uneasy. Chester and I had been rivals for years, always vying for the upper hand in the business world. The idea that he would go out of his way to help me now seemed almost too good to be true. "And you couldn't have just called me?" I asked, still wary. He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Like I said, I thought this was the best way. Besides, I wanted to see you in person, make sure you got it directly." There was a finality in his tone that told me I wasn't going to get any more answers from him tonight. He glanced at the door, then back at me. "I should get going. But Rob, take a good look at what's in that folder. It might change things for you." With that, he gave me a nod, turned, and walked out of the house, leaving me standing there with the folder clutched in my hands. I didn't move, didn't speak, as I listened to the sound of the front door closing behind him. The house was quiet now, the echoes of the evening's festivities fading away, leaving only the heavy weight of whatever Chester had just handed me. I stared down at the folder, my heart pounding in my chest. What could be inside that was so important? What did Chester know that I didn't? After what felt like an eternity, I finally mustered the courage to open it. The contents were neatly organized: papers, documents, and a few printed emails. My eyes skimmed over the first few pages, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was worse than I could have imagined. Chester hadn't just come to deliver a message, he had come to deliver a bombshell. The documents detailed information about my business that I hadn't been aware of, or maybe had chosen to ignore. There were references to financial troubles, potential partnerships that had fallen through, and even rumors of hostile takeovers. But what caught my attention the most were the emails. They were exchanges between people I had thought were allies, people I had trusted. And they were talking about me, about my business, in ways that made it clear they were preparing to move in for the kill. As I read through the emails, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Chester had been right. This was bigger than just a rivalry. My business, the thing I had poured my heart and soul into, was hanging by a thread, and there were people out there ready to cut it. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I closed the folder. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, was in jeopardy, and I had been too distracted, too caught up in my personal life, to see it coming. I sank down onto the couch, the folder still in my lap, as the full weight of the situation pressed down on me. Chester had delivered the information, but what was his motive? Was he genuinely trying to help, or was this just another move in the game we had been playing for years? One thing was clear: I couldn't ignore this. I had to take action, and quickly. But as I sat there in the quiet of the living room, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of foreboding. This was a turning point, and whatever happened next would determine the future of everything I had worked for. After Chester handed me the folder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play. The documents he had given me were just the beginning, a glimpse into the treachery that had been brewing behind my back. I knew I couldn't let this go unanswered. If my business was to survive, if I was to make sense of the chaos that had taken over my life, I had to dig deeper. I had to find out how my competitors had managed to get their hands on so much of my company's confidential. I began my investigation the next day, diving headfirst into the task of unraveling the threads of betrayal that had entangled my business. I started with the most obvious question: how had my competitors gained access to such detailed, sensitive information about my company? The more I looked, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a case of corporate espionage. It was something I combed through my records, going over emails, financial documents, and internal communications with a fine-tooth comb. I interviewed employees, digging into their connections and looking for any signs of disloyalty or suspicious behavior. I reached out to contacts in the industry, subtly probing for any rumors or whispers that might give me a clue. It was slow, grueling work, but piece by piece the picture began to come together. The information that had been leaking out of my company was too specific, too timely to be the work of a random insider. This was someone who had access to everything, someone close to me, someone who knew exactly where to hit me where it hurt the most. And then, finally, I found the connection I had been dreading. It came from an unlikely source, a chance comment made by one of my employees during an interview. She mentioned that my wife, Helly, had been spending a lot of time with a particular man, someone I had never heard of before. The employee didn't think much of it at the time, but the way she described their interactions set off alarm bells, and I started digging into this man's background. And what I found left me cold. He was connected to one of my competitors, someone I had clashed with more than once over the years. But it wasn't just his business ties that alarmed me. It was his relationship with Helly. According to the records I managed to obtain, he and Helly had been in contact for the past 5 months, around the same time my business troubles had begun. As the pieces fell into place, I realized the horrifying truth. This man had become Helly's lover, and through their relationship, he had been extracting information from her about my business. She had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, been feeding him details about our operations, our strategies, everything he needed to sabotage me. It was no wonder my competitors had been so well informed. They had a direct line to the heart of my company, and it was being fed by the one person I should have been able to trust above all others. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My own wife, the woman I had loved and shared my life with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. She had given away my secrets, undermined everything I had worked for, and put our entire future at risk, all for a man who had no interest in her beyond what she could provide him. The shock of it all was overwhelming. I couldn't believe that Helly would do something like this, that she would turn against me so completely. But the evidence was undeniable. I had the emails, the phone records, even photos of them together. There was no mistaking what had happened. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to come to terms with the reality of the situation. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of Helly and the betrayal that had shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I kept going over the past 5 months in my head, replaying conversations, interactions, trying to figure out how I had missed the signs. How had I been so blind? How had I let this happen? The hardest part was knowing that I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more information, more proof before I could do anything. I needed to be sure that there was no way she could talk her way out of this, no way she could deny what she had done. So I kept digging, kept searching for every scrap of evidence that would confirm the truth. Eventually, I found it. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of an email, one that had been sent from Helly's account to her lover, detailing a critical meeting I had with potential investors. The email was short, but it was enough to prove that she had been actively passing on information, knowing full well what she was doing. There was no more doubt, no more room for denial. Helly had betrayed me, and there was no going back. The realization left me feeling hollow, as if everything that had once mattered had been stripped away, leaving nothing but a void. I knew what I had to do next, but it didn't make it any easier. Confronting Helly was going to be the hardest thing I had ever done, but I couldn't let this go on any longer. I couldn't let her continue to play me for a fool, to pretend that everything was fine while she stabbed me in the back. I waited until she was home, sitting in the living room, pretending as if nothing was wrong. The sight of her, so calm and composed, only fueled my anger. How could she sit there, knowing what she had done, knowing how much she had hurt me? I walked into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked up at me with a smile, but it faded when she saw the expression on my face. "Rob, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder Chester had given me, along with the additional evidence I had gathered. I dropped it on the coffee table in front of her, the paper spilling out. "What's this?" she asked, her eyes widening as she looked at the documents. "It's everything," I said, my voice cold. "Everything I've found out about you and your lover. Everything you've been doing behind my back for the past 5 months." Helly's face went pale, her eyes darting from the papers to my face. "Rob, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Helly," I cut her off, my anger finally breaking through. "I've seen the emails, the phone records. I know what you've been doing. I know you've been feeding him information about my business, sabotaging everything I've worked for. I trusted you and you betrayed me." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with emotion. "How could you throw everything away for him? Was it worth it? Was it worth destroying our life, our future?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I had no sympathy left for her, not after everything she had done. "Rob, I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Sorry?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "You're sorry? That's all you have to say? You betrayed me, Helly. You gave away everything, and for what? For him? For someone who doesn't even care about you? Who's just using you to get to me?" She didn't answer, and I could see the truth in her eyes. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late to fix it. I turned away from her, unable to look at her any longer. "I don't know what happens next," I said, my voice cold and distant. "But I do know that you've destroyed everything we had, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the evidence of her betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: my life would never be the same again. The days that followed were a blur, filled with a mix of anger, sadness, and numbness. I couldn't shake the image of Helly's face when I confronted her, the guilt, the fear, the regret. But it didn't matter anymore. Whether she had deliberately tried to destroy me and my business, or had been manipulated and fallen in love with that man, the result was the same. My trust in her was shattered, and without trust, there was nothing left to salvage. I spent countless nights lying awake, replaying everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved become a stranger, someone capable of betraying me so completely? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it didn't matter what her intentions had been. The damage was done, and there was no going back. The decision to end our marriage was both agonizing and inevitable. I couldn't continue living a lie, pretending that things could go back to the way they were. Helly had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. The woman I had once seen as my partner, my confidant, was now just a painful reminder of what I had lost. It was as if the person I had known for so many years had vanished, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. How strange and incomprehensible this world is, I found myself thinking over and over again. The deepest pain is inflicted by those closest to you, while a helping hand comes from those you least expect. Chester's actions of all people had driven this point home. In the midst of all the betrayal, it was he who had reached out, offering a lifeline when I was drowning. It was a bitter irony that the man I had once seen as a rival had become the one to pull me back from the brink, while the woman I had loved was the one who had pushed me over the edge. Divorce was the only path forward, a necessary step in reclaiming my life and my sanity. The legal process was grueling, but the emotional toll was far worse. Every document I signed, Every decision we made to divide our lives felt like another piece of my heart being ripped away. But with each step, I also felt a strange sense of relief, as if I was slowly shedding a weight that had been crushing me for far too long. As the dust began to settle, I turned my attention back to my business. The betrayal had nearly destroyed it, but I wasn't ready to give up. If anything, the ordeal had reignited a fire in me, a determination to rebuild what had been torn down. It wasn't just about saving the company. It was about proving to myself that I could survive this, that I could rise from the ashes and create something stronger. The work was grueling, but it was also a welcome distraction from the pain of the divorce. I threw myself into it with everything I had, spending long hours at the office, strategizing, meeting with clients, and making tough decisions. Slowly but surely, the business began to recover. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wondered if it was all worth it, but I pushed through, driven by the need to reclaim what was mine. In the quiet moments, when the work was done and the house was empty, the loneliness would creep in. I would sit in the same living room where Helly and I had shared so many memories, now haunted by the ghost of what had been. But even in those moments of despair, I knew I was doing the right thing. I couldn't live in the past, couldn't hold on to a love that had been poisoned by betrayal. How strange and incomprehensible this world is, I would think to myself as I stared into the darkness. The deepest pain is inflicted by those closest to you, while a helping hand comes from those you least expect. It was a lesson I had learned the hard way, a truth that had been burned into my soul. The people we trust the most, the ones we open our hearts to, are the ones who have the power to hurt us in ways we never imagined. And sometimes, it's the people we least expect, the ones we've kept at arm's length, who step forward when we need them most. In time, the wounds began to heal. The pain of Helly's betrayal didn't disappear, but it became more manageable, a dull ache rather than a sharp, stabbing pain. I found myself thinking about the future again, about the possibilities that lay ahead. The business was stabilizing, my life was slowly coming back together, and while the scars of the past would always be there, they no longer defined me. I began to see the divorce not just as an ending, but as a new beginning, a chance to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. The trust I had lost, the love that had been broken, couldn't be restored. But I could learn from it, grow from it. I could become stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As the months passed, I found myself opening up to new experiences, new relationships. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and started to rediscover the things that brought me joy. The bitterness that had consumed me for so long began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism, a belief that perhaps, just maybe, there was still hope for happiness. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst, had walked through the fire, and I had come out the other side. The world was still strange and incomprehensible, still full of surprises, some painful, some unexpected. But I had learned that I could survive, that I could endure, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places. As I stood on the brink of this new chapter in my life, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The past was behind me, the future was ahead, and I was ready to face it, whatever it might bring. And as I looked back on the journey that had brought me here, I couldn't help but marvel at how strange and incomprehensible this world truly is.